So our last speaker for this session, again, everybody should come back for the afternoon session after a nice lunch. But our next speaker is Greg Reis with the Bay Institute. We've talked about data in a variety of different fashions and coming up with information on recommendations. But Greg's presentation is going to be looking at how do we take data information and put it in a way that it is translatable and understandable by decision makers, but also the broader public, and talking about that specifically with freshwater flows in the Central Valley.
Thanks. Great presentations. I'm really enjoying all of them. So I'm with the Bay Institute, and we are a nonprofit that works to protect, restore, and inspire the conservation of the San Francisco Bay and its watershed from the Sierra to the sea. We've worked with John Rosenfield and I have worked with Virgil Zetterland with Protected Seas to develop a data capture, automatic data capture system, harvesting data from various agency websites, primarily flow data, but also water quality data, and then populating CSV files and spreadsheets that we then use in various analyses or to produce graphics. So I'm going to talk about why we're doing that, why it's important, and a little bit about how, and then show you a few of the products we're producing. So why it's important. The San Francisco Bay is the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas. As with any estuary, it's a place where fresh water meets salt water. This is a very productive ecosystem, and it depends on freshwater inflow. If you take that freshwater inflow away, you pretty much kill the ecosystem. So freshwater is the lifeblood of the San Francisco Bay estuary. About 90% of that freshwater flow comes from the Central Valley. So that's why the focus is on the Central Valley. And as with everywhere in California, we have a lot of endemic species, a lot of endangered species, and it's a very ecologically amazing and remarkable place. So the overlay on that is what we've built. We have, as with everywhere else in California, there are development pressures that need to be managed, and we've built over 1,400 large dams in the state. Some of them are shown on this map. And by doing so and diverting lots of water and exporting lots of water and storing lots of water, we've created a state of permanent drought for the estuary, and it's the rivers that flow to it. And as a result, many species are in severe decline and many are endangered. So that permanent drought can be visualized on this graph. On the top panel is unimpaired flow. And unimpaired flow is an index of natural runoff. It's not natural because land use is not natural, but it is the flow that would occur if there weren't any dams or diversions or exports. And it's in million acre feet on the left, and that's a delta outflow flow into the San Francisco Bay estuary. We've made this graph pretty by sorting the years into quintiles, 5 different bins of equal number of years in each bin. We're calling them wettest, above average, average, below average, dry, and then a subset of dry is supercritical. And this is February to June flow. It's a critical time period for many species that are present in the estuary. And the top graph showing unimpaired shows the flow that would occur without dams or diversions. The bottom graph shows the actual flow. And as you can see, we've shifted things, and the supercritical category, which is pretty much anything drier than 1976, and the pointer does work. It's hard to see. Oh, there it is. Okay. So 1976, 77 is right here, the red and the black. So any year drier than 76 falls into that supercritical subcategory of the dry years. So in the unimpaired hydrology, 1977 was the only year that fell into that category. However, with our water management since over the last 40 years, we've turned about half the years into supercritical years, as experienced by the estuary, the processes in the estuary, and the creatures that live in it. So on top of that actual graph, we've overlaid the declining percent of unimpaired, which in the 1930s and 40s was more like 80% of unimpaired was reaching the estuary, and now it's more like 40%. So this is another representation of that hydrology on a daily basis. And you can see on the hydrograph, there's the blue line, which is unimpaired, the orangey brown line, which is actual flow. And we have overlaid, on the bottom of this, you have the blue indicating the presence of various species in the estuary. And when those species are present, primarily is that in here it's, each species is different, but you see a lot of them are present in the winter and spring, and brown shades the area of greatest hydrologic impairment. So you can see when the unimpaired and the actual lines are farthest apart, tends to be when we get the big flows, when we're storing a lot of water in reservoirs, and during that January to June period. So you can find some of these, those two and other graphics in our report we came out with last fall, called the San Francisco Bay, the Freshwater Starved Estuary, and it's available online. And that report synthesizes about 150 different references that talk about the value of freshwater flowing to how freshwater flowing to the ocean sustains California's greatest aquatic ecosystem, as it shows in the title there. So some things that aren't in that report that we've been working on are, the top isn't cut off. We actually have a paper we've submitted on this analysis. It's an analysis of what limited exports 2011 to 2016 and South Delta exports for the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. And there's a lot you hear in the media about this. If you read the Mid-SWRCB, you would think Delta smelt limited exports all the time. And so we took a look at the numbers to see, well, is that true? And it tends not to be true. This is 2016 as an example, but you can see the other years, and you can see 2011 to 2016, the full period in that first column of percentages. But you can see there was during that period, there was some export limitation about 92% of the time. And then the colors, HSB refers to hydraulic salinity barrier, which is water quality for human uses, pushing the salt water back out. So that came first. And then we overlaid on top, and that was a kind of a placeholder amount that other people are refining that number, but we put a number in there just to have a placeholder. And then we overlaid other volumes on top of that, because if we go back, well, let's see. So this is time, not volumes. Fish and Wildlife refers to the Water Quality Control Plan, and that is mostly outflow, EI ratio, and Vernalis 1-to-1 standards. And then additional water on top of that was the anadromous fisheries RPA in the orangey color. And then on top of that, any water for Delta smelt RPA. So you can see Delta smelt RPA limited about 6% of the time. But in volume, you'll see a lot of the March, April, May, excuse me, March, April, May period, there was hard to see. March, April, May period at the top, though, you see it switching between the different limitations, and that's because a lot of them were similar. So if you took one protection away, you wouldn't necessarily generate a lot more export because something else would kick in just below that level. So we also did a volumetric analysis to see what that meant in volume. And for delta smelt, well, for endangered species, which is the purple, so we'll work up from the bottom. The red is the hydraulic salinity barrier. The blue at the bottom is exports. And then up to export capacity is the green and the purple. So if the green, water quality control plan, and the purple, the Endangered Species Act, were taken away, the exports would go up to the tops of those lines. And so ESA was responsible for about I believe it was 6% of the volume of the runoff being limited and flowing out to the bay. And then delta smelt, I think, was about 0.5% of the state's, or not the state's, the watershed's runoff, which I think all would agree are very small prices to pay to have those species around. What we are doing, and I initially had a few slides on this. I distilled it down to one. If anybody's interested in how this process works, I'm happy to talk more later, but this is the part Virgil with Protected Seas is doing. He's done all the coding and the data capture into CSV files. But it's pretty much harvesting USGS, CDEC, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and State Water Project information off their websites from a variety of formats, PDF tables, which are really problematic to parse and pull the data from, and actually change formats periodically. You get 1 month you're pulling data from, and the next month the format changes and breaks it, and you get missing days, and you got to fix it. Virgil's been dealing with all that stuff, but overall it works pretty well. Doesn't need a lot of fixing, and maybe once a month needs a little tending, but that is then providing all the water balance information that we then can use in our analyses. This is saving a lot of time, and it's allowing us to do some exciting things. For about the last 2 years, we've been doing flow updates in the winter-spring season, trying to provide an estimate of unimpaired flows and what the actual flows are, primarily at the delta, but also a little bit for the other rivers, or the tributary rivers. And in this year, well, let's see, we've been trying to do them monthly. We haven't quite kept up, but there's been a lot of interest from congressional offices, from other NGOs, from the State Water Board, and from the media especially. People were posting our updates to like Google Drive so they could link to it. So we realized we got to get this on the web somehow so people can share it. And ideally, we could have it updated automatically. So this is what we did. This is available newly this week. Not fully functional yet. The Sacramento River doesn't work yet. But you can select between San Francisco Bay inflow, Sacramento San Joaquin Delta inflow, San Joaquin River, and Sacramento River at the Delta. The Sacramento River is not functional because of I'm still sorting out some of the stations at the YOLO bypass, which stations to use for this year's flows. So that's not quite running up yet, but the other ones are functional. The actual data is from Daveflow, and the unimpaired comes from an estimate of monthly unimpaired that DWR produces, and then daily estimates at the RIM stations. DWR produces that back to about 1999. You go back farther than that, and what I've done is trying to parse that monthly volume on a daily pattern. And as has been mentioned many times today, all models are wrong. But it is useful to see the daily pattern, and I'll share the URL for this at the end. If you go to this and look at the monthly ones, they look really blocky, and they're just not great to visualize the difference between actual and unimpaired, where actual is a daily and unimpaired is a monthly block. But we have plans to keep working on this and improving this, and I just didn't get a lot of sleep this week trying to make it happen, so it didn't quite happen in time for today. But let's see, so in this example you can see 2016 on the top and 2009 on the bottom, so a couple of years that have similar scales on the y-axis there with the flow in cubic feet per second. At the top you see the percent of unimpaired flow, and those are monthly blocks that you're seeing on this graph. And then in the title we have the percent for the water year, so year to date in the water year, percent of unimpaired in million acre feet actual versus unimpaired. So it ties into some of the other talks where it's helpful to see the degree of alteration, and you can see in this example for the San Joaquin River, very high degree of alteration. So here's another example. This one is for the delta inflow for water year 2015 and 2014, so two of our driest years of the drought. And you can see the mouse over on the bottom. You can mouse over all of these and see the unimpaired on any day, the actual on any day, and then the percent of unimpaired flow reaching the bay or the delta or whatever location on the river that you've chosen. So in this example, you see on February 11th, 2014, about 28% of the unimpaired flow is reaching the delta during that first peak flow. And then my last one, just one more example. This is 2017 on the top compared to 2011, a wet year as well. Not quite as wet, but also a wet in the wet category on the bottom. And you can see 2011 is up to date until about the 25th of this month. Usually we're about 2 to 3 days behind. It just updates every night at midnight, and it just ends up being a couple of days lag before there's data for that day in the system. But you can see our estimate for unimpaired flow is, in this case, for delta, let's see, San Francisco Bay inflow, delta outflow, is about 79,000 CFS, which makes the percent of unimpaired pretty low in the 20s, I think it was 20 to 30%, which is currently reaching the estuary. So these we're going to keep updating and improving and working on that daily patterning of the monthlies. If you go back to before 1999, we want to add the RIM stations, so you can in that drop-down menu, select any of the 10 largest rivers in the Central Valley at the RIM stations. We eventually might add some water quality data, but again, this is a long-term plan. This is what we've got, that we're going to focus on the flow for now and work on water quality in the future. But that's it. Thanks. And here's where you can find it.